The letter was sitting on top of the others when I got home that Tuesday evening. I had been on my feet since 6 in the morning. A 12-hour shift troubleshooting a server migration that should have taken 4 hours but stretched into something that swallowed the entire day whole. My shoes were still on when I dropped my bag by the door and reached for the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. Mostly catalogs, a utility bill, and then a white envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Pacific Coast Escrow Services, Phoenix, Arizona. I don't live in Phoenix. I've never lived in Phoenix. I have no reason to receive correspondence from an escrow company in a state I visited exactly once for a conference 3 years ago. I opened it anyway. The letter was 2 pages, professional letterhead. The language was formal and dense, the kind of language that takes a second read to fully absorb. But there was one sentence on the first page that I read 4 times standing in my kitchen with my coat still on, and I understood it perfectly each time. This letter confirms the successful closing of the property located at 4412 Saguaro Ridge Drive, Phoenix, AZ, with Maya Calloway listed as co-borrower on the attached mortgage agreement in the amount of $175,000. I set the letter down on the counter. I picked it up again. I am not a co-borrower on any mortgage. I have never signed a mortgage agreement in Arizona or anywhere else. I have never heard of Saguaro Ridge Drive. The name Maya Calloway is my name. It is the name on my driver's license, my social security card, the lease for the apartment I have rented in Seattle for the past 4 years. Someone had used it to borrow $175,000. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter spread open in front of me and my laptop beside it, and I started pulling every thread I could find. I ran a credit check first. My score had dropped 41 points. There was a hard inquiry from a mortgage lender I had never heard of, Sunrise Valley Lending, a company based in Scottsdale. The inquiry was dated 11 weeks earlier. The mortgage itself had closed 9 days ago. 9 days. Someone had been carrying around a mortgage in my name for 9 days before an administrative letter accidentally found its way to my actual address, instead of wherever they had intended it to go. I thought about who knew me well enough to do this. I thought about who had access to the kind of personal information a mortgage application requires. Social security number, date of birth, employment history, income documentation, a signature, and then I thought about my brother. 6 months before that letter arrived, my brother and his wife had asked me to co-sign a lease for a storage unit they needed while they were between apartments. I had said yes, without much thought. I had filled out a form. The form had my social security number on it, my date of birth, my current address, my employer. I had handed it to my sister-in-law because my brother wasn't there that afternoon. She had smiled and said she would take care of the rest. I stared at my ceiling for a long time after that thought landed. I called Pacific Coast Escrow Services at 9 the next morning. The moment their offices opened, I asked to speak with whoever had handled the file associated with my name. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I reached a man named Gerald, who told me he was the lead escrow officer on the Saguaro Ridge transaction. I told him who I was. I told him I had received a closing letter for a mortgage I had never agreed to. I told him my name was on documents I had never signed. There was a pause on his end that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I need to ask you to come into our office. In person. Today, if possible." I booked a flight to Phoenix before we hung up. My brother had been in my life for 38 years. He was 4 years older than me. The kind of older brother who used to drive me to school when our mother worked early shifts, who sat in the hospital waiting room when I had my appendix out at 22, who called me every Sunday for years without missing a single week. We had not always agreed on everything. We had gone through stretches of distance, the way siblings do when life pulls in different directions. But I had never once looked at him and seen someone capable of what I was beginning to piece together. His wife was a different story. I had never been able to say exactly what it was about my sister-in-law that made the air in a room feel slightly different when she walked into it. She was charming in a way that was technically indistinguishable from warmth, but never quite felt the same. She remembered every detail you shared with her, every preference and discomfort, and she filed those details away in a manner that over time began to feel less like affection and more like inventory. My brother loved her completely. I had kept my reservations to myself for 10 years. I did not keep them to myself on the flight to Phoenix. I sat with my hands flat on my knees and I went through every interaction I could remember in the past year. The storage unit form. A dinner where she had asked, seemingly out of nowhere, whether I was still at the same company. A text she had sent in January, asking me to confirm my mailing address because she wanted to send a birthday card. I had confirmed it without thinking. She had built the application piece by piece from things I had given her freely, because I had trusted that she was asking for the reasons she said she was asking. By the time the plane landed, I was no longer confused. I was very, very calm. The offices of Pacific Coast Escrow Services were on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Phoenix. Gerald met me in the lobby himself. He was a compact man in his early 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and an expression that communicated immediately that he had been doing this job long enough to recognize exactly what kind of situation he was now in. The middle of. He shook my hand. He did not make small talk. He walked me directly to a conference room where a second person was already seated, a woman named Diane who introduced herself as the company's compliance officer. A third chair had been pulled to the table. On the table itself was a manila folder, closed. Gerald sat down. Diane sat down. I sat down. Before I open this file, Gerald said, I need to verify your identity independently, not the documents we have on record. You, directly. I placed my driver's license, my passport, and my social security card on the table. He looked at each one. He looked at me. He wrote something down. Then he opened the folder. The mortgage application was on top. It was 12 pages. My name was on the front page, listed as co-borrower alongside another name, a name I recognized immediately as a person my sister-in-law had mentioned once, briefly, as a friend from her previous city. Someone who apparently existed and apparently had a credit history, but, Gerald explained carefully, apparently had a significantly weaker borrowing profile than the co-borrower listed beside them, meaning my name had been added to make the numbers work. On page 7, there was a signature line. The signature above my printed name was not my signature. I have a particular way of writing the C in Callaway, a small loop at the base that I have made the same way since I was 12 years old, learning cursive from a teacher who drilled it into us until it was muscle memory. The signature on that page had no loop. It was a clean, confident imitation of what someone might imagine my signature looked like after studying it from a single sample. The storage unit form. This is not my signature, I said. We suspected as much, Diane said. The notarization on the closing documents was performed remotely via video call. The platform logs all sessions. We pulled the session recording yesterday after your call to Gerald. She slid a printed screenshot across the table. The woman on the screen in the notarization session was not me. She was close, approximately my age, similar coloring, the kind of resemblance that could pass a casual visual check. But the jawline was different. The hairline was different. And in the upper right corner of the screenshot, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a framed photograph sitting on a shelf. I recognized the photograph. I had seen it in their living room. It was a photo of my brother and his wife on their wedding day. I pointed to it. I did not say anything for a moment. Is that sufficient? I asked. Gerald looked at the photograph. He looked at me. He removed his reading glasses from the top of his head and set them on the table. We've already contacted our legal team, he said, and we've placed a hold on the dispersed funds. Not all of them have moved yet. $72,000 had already been transferred out of the account attached to the mortgage. $103,000 remained in a holding account that Diane's team had frozen at 6:15 that morning, 2 hours before I walked through their door. They had been moving faster than I knew. The escrow company's attorney joined us by phone for the second half of that meeting. He explained in clear, unhurried language what had happened, what it constituted under federal law, and what the next steps looked like. Mortgage fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, the kind of charges that carry sentences measured in years, not months, and fines that don't have a ceiling that feels manageable. He also told me something I had not anticipated. 2 days earlier, before I had ever called Gerald, before the letter had even arrived at my address, someone had contacted Pacific Coast Escrow to ask why the confirmation letter had been sent to a Seattle address. They had wanted to know if it could be rerouted. The staff member who received that call had flagged it as unusual and escalated it to Diane instead of acting on it. That phone call was what had triggered the internal review that was already underway when I reached out. Someone had gotten nervous. Someone had made a mistake. I thought about who in that transaction would have had the escrow company's contact information. I thought about who would have been monitoring the mail trail closely enough to notice the letter had gone to the wrong address within days of closing. My sister-in-law was meticulous. She was the kind of person who kept spreadsheets for things most people handled in their heads. She would have been watching every piece of this. She had panicked. And in panicking, she had handed them exactly the thread they needed. The Phoenix Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit sent 2 detectives to the escrow office that afternoon. I had agreed to stay and give a formal statement. I sat in that conference room for 4 hours. I walked them through the storage unit form, the text message about the mailing address, the dinner conversation about my employer. I walked them through the wedding photo on the shelf in the notarization recording. I showed them the signature discrepancy. I showed them the credit report pull. One of the detectives, a woman named Patricia who had been taking notes in a small spiral notebook without looking up for most of my account, finally looked up. "The primary borrower on this application?" she said. "Do you know this person?" I told her I had heard the name once, in passing. "She's cooperating," Patricia said. "She says she was recruited. She says she was told the co-borrower had pre-authorized everything." "Recruited by whom?" I asked. Patricia didn't answer directly, but she didn't have to. I called my brother on the way back to my hotel. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always did. With that easy hello that had always made me feel like I was calling at exactly the right time. "Hey," he said, "how's Seattle?" "I'm in Phoenix," I said. The silence that followed was different from Gerald's silence on the phone that morning. Gerald's silence had been professional, measured, the silence of someone choosing their next words carefully. My brother's silence was the silence of someone whose blood pressure had just changed. "Why are you in Phoenix?" he said. His voice had dropped half a register. "I think you know why," I said. I heard him exhale, long and slow, like he had been holding it for weeks. "Maya, I need to know one thing," I said. "Right now, before anything else happens. Did you know what she was doing?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Not all of it," he said finally. "I knew she was trying to figure out the financing. I didn't know she used your—" He stopped. "I didn't know the whole thing. I believed him about not knowing the whole thing. I also knew that not knowing the whole thing was not the same as not knowing anything. I also knew that what I believed personally was not the same as what the law was going to evaluate. You need to call a lawyer," I said. "Tonight." I hung up. The arrest happened 3 days later. I was back in Seattle by then. Patricia called me at 11 in the morning to tell me that my sister-in-law had been taken into custody at the home she and my brother were renting in Tempe. My brother had not been arrested. He had, in fact, already been in contact with a federal public defender and had voluntarily provided a statement the previous afternoon. Patricia told me this in the same factual, unhurried tone she had used in the conference room. She told me that the detached primary borrower, the woman my sister-in-law had recruited, had provided a full account of how she had been approached, what she had been promised, and what she had been shown to convince her that everything was legitimate. My sister-in-law had shown her a document, a letter, apparently on professional letterhead, purporting to be my written authorization to be added to the mortgage as a co-borrower. Patricia read me a portion of it. It was well written, formal, detailed. It referenced my correct address, my employer, my phone number. It was also dated 3 months before the date it referenced as our initial conversation. A small error. The kind of error that only becomes visible when you are looking for it. An investigator had spotted it in the document review. My sister-in-law had been so confident in the architecture of what she had constructed that she had not checked whether the timeline held together. She had been so certain she had covered every angle that she had introduced a discrepancy she didn't know was there. I thought about the wedding photo on the shelf during the remote notarization, a 10-second adjustment. Moving the photo 30 inches to the left, or simply being in a different room, that was all it would have taken. She hadn't done it. She was meticulous. She was careful, and she had still handed it to them. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it matters that the system worked the way it was supposed to work. I think it matters that a staff member at an escrow company flagged an unusual phone call and sent it up the chain instead of just rerouting a letter. I think it matters that a detective with a spiral notebook sat in a conference room for 4 hours and wrote down everything I said. The $72,000 that had already moved was more complicated and would take longer to recover, but the $103,000 frozen in the holding account was released back into the correct channels within the week. My credit score began to recover within 30 days of the fraud alert being placed. My brother called me 6 weeks after the arrest. It was a Sunday. He had called every Sunday for years. He almost didn't call that one. I answered. He didn't try to explain or minimize. He said he was sorry. He said he had known she was pursuing some kind of financing arrangement and had chosen not to ask too many questions because they needed the money, and he had told himself she would handle it the way she handled everything. He said choosing not to ask was a choice. He said he knew that. I listened. I didn't say much. The case against my sister-in-law included charges at both the state and federal levels: wire fraud, mortgage fraud, identity theft, forgery. The federal charges alone carry a maximum of 30 years. Restitution had been ordered on top of whatever sentence follows the trial. She had wanted a house. She had looked at what I had: a stable income, a clean credit history, a decade of responsible financial behavior, and she had decided that what I had was available to her without asking. She had been that certain that she could build something on top of my name, and I would never look down. The escrow letter that found its way to my mailbox instead of wherever she intended it to go was not luck. It was a small administrative error in a long chain of things she had controlled perfectly until they stopped being controllable. She had planned for everything, except the thing she didn't plan for. I want to say something directly. For anyone watching this who is in a situation that feels even slightly familiar, check your credit report, not next month, now, or as close to now as you can get it. Federal law entitles you to a free report from each of the 3 major bureaus every year, and there are services that will show you hard inquiries in real time. A hard inquiry you don't recognize is a flag. An account you don't remember opening is a flag. An address on file that isn't yours is a flag. The people most likely to have access to the specific pieces of information that identity fraud requires: social security number, date of birth, employment history, mother's maiden name, are not strangers. They are people close enough to be trusted with paperwork, close enough to be in your home, close enough to know the details you stop thinking of as sensitive because you have stopped thinking of them as information at all. I handed my sister-in-law my social security number on a form for a storage unit. I confirmed my mailing address via text message because she said she wanted to send a birthday card. She sent the card. It arrived 2 weeks later. I put it on my refrigerator. I am not telling you this to make you suspicious of everyone you love. I am telling you this because the storage unit form is still sitting in a filing cabinet in my apartment. I kept it. I look at it sometimes, not because I am angry, but because I think it is important to remember that trust is not the same as carelessness, that I had every reason to hand her that form, that the fault for what she did with it belongs entirely to her. I also keep it because the loop at the bottom of my C is still there, in my handwriting, on a line I signed of my own free will. No one gets to use that, not without asking. The case goes to trial in 4 months. I will be there. I will sit in that courtroom with my passport, my driver's license, and my credit report printed out and dated, and I will be exactly as calm as I was on the day I walked into a conference room in Phoenix and placed my documents on a table in front of a man who needed to know who I actually was. I know who I am. I have always known. That was the thing she miscalculated most.